Cataf. Welcome to World War II Live. I am John C. McManus, your host, and alongside is our other host, Kevin Hemel.
Hey,
Kevin.
John, I am the Sergeant Horvath to your Captain Miller tonight.
And I'll tell you what, that's an honor. I mean, no, Mike, I do want to know what you think. That's the theme for tonight, right?
Yep.
Alongside, as always, too, is our crack producer, Chief of Staff manipulating the dials, Mark Festoso as well.
All right, the man behind the curtain.
Absolutely the man behind the curtain. So, of course, what better place to start our discussion than a topic I know everything about and you know nothing, George
Of
Patton.
course. Well, John, that clip from the movie Patton is a great place to start because Morocco is where Patton starts World War II in combat. So I figured let's talk a little bit about Operation Torch, the 3 days of combat, and what Patton does there. And we can talk about some of the infantry troops underneath him that you might know, I don't know, a thing or two about. I don't want to go overboard. But you know what's great, John? We're able to talk about this because of World War II History Magazine. This episode is sponsored by WarfareHistoryNetwork.com, the online home of WW2 History Magazine and other fine military history publications from Sovereign Media. WW2 History Magazine features in-depth articles on all aspects of World War II, and each is lavishly illustrated with historic photos, maps, combat art, and more. Visit www.warfarehistorynetwork.com to find all the WW2 history articles published over the last 25 years, plus just as many articles covering the whole history of armed conflict. Begin your digital subscription to access all the articles on the website, or sign up to receive a subscription to the print edition, or both. WarfareHistoryNetwork.com will take you to the front lines. And, John, you and I have both got a past with publishing in magazines in the World War II realm. And Carl Nam founded both the magazines we've worked for. And so we're both very fortunate about that. But let's talk about Patton and Morocco. What do you think, man?
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is just our beginning point with Patton. I mean, obviously, we're going to do a lot of episodes on Patton. I mean, that's, I mean, I was joking about my knowledge. Obviously, it's in your wheelhouse. All kidding aside, I really think you're the leading expert on Patton living today. And so, like as we talk about this beginning point of the war for him, he's kind of a de facto corps commander, wouldn't you say? I mean, he's got a
Yes.
task force, but it's so where is he right now at this point in his life, and how does he approach this, first amphibious invasion that he's leading?
Yep. So he is an experienced combat commander. He's experienced being under fire both in Mexico under John J. Pershing in 1915, and then, of course, in 1918 in World War I, where he leads basically our first and only tank unit to really go into combat and really makes headlines and makes a name for himself. Really a cavalryman, a West Point grad, Olympian. He was in the 1912 Olympics in something called the modern pentathlon. And one of these guys who I hate to say it, but he obsessed with his vocation. Omar Bradley famously did math problems to calm his mind. Eisenhower liked to read Western dime novels. Patton is just studying military history 24/7. I mean, during World War II, he's going to write his wife every time he gets his hands on a new history book. I mean, that's who he was. And, he wasn't really reading World War II history, but a lot of Civil War and a lot of ancient European history. He just really cloaked himself in it. And so, very much a professional soldier. It's rare that we have combat experienced leaders in World War II because it was such a small part of the officer corps that goes off to World War I. There's really, there's so many corps commanders and division commanders that had not seen combat in World War One, in World War II. But he's kind of, one of the best guys for the job. He's got a reputation as a real, disciplinarian, which you kind of need with a civilian army, a green army. And, he's been marked by George Marshall as someone who's going to do well in World War II. And I think he lives up to it.
Well, and there's of course, there's a lot riding on this because this is pretty much whatever second front we can come up with in 1942, this is tantamount to it. I mean, and the Americans are leading the way in an
Mhm.
amphibious invasion for really only the second time in this war. I mean, the previous time is at Guadalcanal a few months earlier in August.
Right.
Buna, which happens more or less at the same time, isn't really the same kind of amphibious operation. It's more of an airlift operation.
Yep.
So here he's got, multiple divisions under his command, and a lot of the convoy, of course, has come all the way from the U.S.
Yep.
He's had to deal with the naval logistics and with the landing logistics too. I mean, don't you think that he's really kind of this is a really kind of growth professional moment for him on some level? What do you think?
Oh boy. From almost like high school to grad school. It's such a leap. Um, and he's got this green army. He's got to go across an ocean, and he's also got to fight the British as well as the Morocco, the French Vichy. And I'll explain that in a second. But what you were talking about as our second amphibious assault, you know, uh, George C. Marshall, the chief of staff of the army, when after Pearl Harbor, he's like, we need to build up troops in England and send them into France. He wants to go to the heart of Germany. And Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, is more of a rationalist, and he realizes we're not going to be able to do that for a long time. And we've got this new ally, Joseph Stalin, and we need to prove to him, because he's losing hundreds of thousands of guys on the battlefield every day. We got to prove to him we can get boots on the ground and start taking pressure off of him. And more importantly, we got to go somewhere where we can win right off the bat. We need to start with an American victory. And that's how they collectively come up with North Africa. They won't be fighting the Germans, they'll be fighting Vichy French, French that have sworn a loyalty to Nazi Germany. And the whole operation is called Torch. And it's going to be these amphibious landings. Patton's going to be in Morocco, coming from the United States. And then there'll be two task forces coming from England, which is a combination of American and British troops that are going to land in Algiers and Iran. Algiers and Iran, in Algeria. And the British aren't too happy about this because they want this big reinforcement coming closer to combat. And they look at Patton's Morocco landing and they go, you're what, 1,500 miles away from the target, and you've got the Atlas Mountains in between. We should cancel this entire invasion. And it infuriates Patton. But Roosevelt knows if we're going to go into France at some point, we want a port that we can use to go into France. And he sees Morocco as the closest one. So he's really thinking strategically. Patton actually gets so mad about this during one of the meetings in DC that he comes home to his house and he picks up this like lava statue they call Charlie that they had picked up in Hawaii, him and his wife. And it was a Hawaiian war god. And he decides that the war gods have turned on him. So he marches into the backyard and they have a pond there and he spikes Charlie into the pond. Now, the British do relent and they finally agree to Morocco as one of the landing beaches for Torch. And so, with that, Patton's going to start training his army. And John, you can speak better to this. What is the training like for the infantry? Because one of those units, in fact, his main infantry unit is going to be the 3rd Infantry Division, which you've written about.
Absolutely. So this is my unit, the 7th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd ID. These guys have done a lot of intensive amphibious training, and so at this point in our armed forces, there are basically three trained up amphibious capable divisions: the 1st Marine Division, and the 1st and 3rd Infantry Divisions, and maybe the 34th too on some level, but I don't think they're quite in the same category. So that means a lot of mock landings. I mean, just constantly getting ready to get aboard a ship, living aboard ship for several days, like going down into the landing craft, figuring out where you're supposed to be in the landing craft, what you do when you get off. Of course, too, there's the different organization you've got for an infantry unit going in via boats versus regular continental operations. So all of this is really quite complex at
And
this
John, where are
point.
they doing this? Where are they doing the training?
So they're well, the 7th Infantry had done this even before being deployed for Torch, on the West Coast.
Hmm.
They're like in Monterey in California. Eventually, we're going to be doing some of this on the East Coast too. So the actually the whole division gets aboard trains and goes across the country. They had figured when they were training, like in Monterey, they were going to be going to the Pacific, and that made total sense. So they become kind of the actors in this kind of strategic interplay that had happened, with Roosevelt in the meantime agreeing to Operation Torch operations in North Africa. So for them, that meant this cross country jaunt aboard trains and then refresher training and then being aboard ships. So they've had a lot of weapons training. They've had a lot of, obviously amphibious training. They've had a lot of physical conditioning, though not what they're going to have once they're in North Africa, famously, of course, when Lucian Truscott takes over the division. The other thing, too, their adversaries, we call them French, but they're really local guys. I mean, this is an imperial situation. And
Hmm.
yes, French officers are in control, and there are some people of mixed heritage or some ethnic French, people from metropolitan France. But most of the people you're going to face are locals from Morocco or Algeria. Who are they going to want to fight? Will they want to fight? It's a really odd political dynamic.
Yeah, that occupies a lot of Patton's brain space. Is there going to be an exchange of wine and American chocolate on the beaches, or is it going to be lead? You don't know until you go in. And Patton, when he's getting ready to leave, so the invasion is slated for November 8th, 1942. And think about that. Pearl Harbor's December 7th, 1941. That's how long it takes us to develop enough troops and naval shipping and all those things to be able to launch an offensive like
Which
this.
is still a pretty quick turnaround when you think about it.
Yep.
11 months. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And I think that's why first and third divisions are such an integral component of this, because you needed units that had some level of muscle memory for
Hmm.
amphibious operations, and those were the two they could lay in hand.
Yep.
And yeah, so yeah, it's a good point.
And so, we're talking a lot of practical stuff here. I'm going to go on the emotional level for a second. Patton says goodbye to his wife. His son is at West Point. He has a meeting with President Roosevelt and Marshall, but he goes over to Walter Reed Army Hospital. And laying in bed there is John J. Pershing, his
Mhm.
commander from Mexico in World War I, and basically drops on one knee and asks for his blessing. And Pershing, puts his hand on him and says, good luck and you're going to do great. And you're the same age I was when I went off to fight World War I. And Patton is, just taking all this in. This man is like a father figure to him. And Patton gets up to leave. And before he steps out the door, he turns around and he salutes Pershing. And Pershing sits up in bed and salutes him back. And he said, like, he dropped like 10 years with that salute that he gave him. And so, with that blessing, Patton's now going to head across the Atlantic at the head of this force of, he's got about 35,000 soldiers, mostly 3rd ID, and then some 9th Infantry Division, ID, abbreviation for Infantry Division. Since you reprimand me, John,
Way
every
to go.
time I say infantry, and we'll have to
I
have a
gotta keep
fight
you
about
honest,
that at
you
some.
tanker armor guy. I mean, come on, I
we're
gotta keep
definitely
you
gonna
honest.
we're gonna have a whole episode where we fight about that.
Good.
Um, so
Yes.
about 35,000 troops, which is pretty much what the other task force. There's 3 task force. They all have about 35,000 troops. He's gonna have about 250 aircraft and 250 tanks, and he's gonna land in 3 places, which is over like 200 miles away from each other. There's the port of Medina in the north. There's Casablanca, the famous city from Humphrey Bogart, that is so shocked to find gambling going on at Rick's. And then further south than that is a town called Safi. And so in the north, that's got a river, the Cebu River. So you're going to have access and an airstrip. So that's important. Fadala Beach is that sort of center of gravity where you just
That's where the
right north.
seventh comes ashore.
Yep. And that's the seventh,
Infantry. Hmm.
which is part of the
Hmm.
third ID. And
Right.
then Safi is important because that's a port where they have, cranes and things and can bring the tanks in because we don't have the facilities really to roll the tanks, so easily as we do, or we're eventually going to be able to do. Um, and so the force goes in, and Patton is shocked that the Navy has been able to get them there on time and in the right place. He keeps predicting, the Navy never gets anyone to the right place at the right time. And Admiral Hewitt, the commander of the Naval Task Force, when they first meet, Patton just starts cussing at him and yelling at him. And he just walks away and he calls Marshall. And he goes, I can't work with this guy. He's crazy. And Marshall's like, I know, just stay calm. He's really good at what he does. You just got to take on that part of his personality. And he does embrace it, and they do become a really good team. So much so, they're going to work together in Sicily. Um, before the sun rises on November 8th, 1942, Patton's going to wake up about 3 in the morning. He's fully dressed. He's going to go up on deck. It's pitch black, and he can see the landing craft starting to head out, to the areas.
Yep.
And he's hearing call signs come up, all my ducks are in a row, and, play ball and things like that. He can hear them over the radio. And, the question is it going to be fight or flight with the French? And he sees a light shoot up into the sky on the shore, and he thinks that's the signal that everything's okay. Well, then that light arcs down onto the beach, and they start shooting up the beach. So there is fighting. The French have if anything, honor to uphold. And what was the fighting on the beach like, John?
Yeah, so this is a nighttime landing, and I mean, it's really something of a fiasco, because it just getting to the beach is really the big challenge, not necessarily the resistance, although in places, there's some pretty serious fire, like you said, that you have to wonder about, like near Fadela, where the 7th Infantry comes ashore. There are some artillery pieces, there's some machine gun posts and whatnot. Now they're manned by people who don't necessarily want to fight very long, but like you said, they have honor to fulfill. And
Hmm.
in many cases, it's their home soil. And I don't know if they're thinking themselves as French so much as Moroccan, maybe. And so you do have that dynamic, but really the biggest challenge is just keeping all those landing crafts in a good row together and not getting them smashed against coral and rock, not coral, but rocks
Yep.
and the coastline and so these are not your later generation Higgins boats that have steel.
That had
These are
that
mainly
boom
wooden
drop
boats.
down front.
Yeah, with the boom ramp. These are
Yep.
mainly wooden boats that you're jumping over the sides, and
Hmm.
so they're a little flimsy. And so, the third ID has that experience of the difficulty in getting ashore is mainly battling nature and
Yep.
confusion. Once you do get ashore, yeah, you've got these interspersed firefights that are going on. So it's like anywhere, it's luck of the draw where you land.
Yep.
And so they get Fidela pretty quickly, and the third ID is going to be moving towards Casablanca, have it within 2 days or so,
Hmm.
even less than that. This is when we think about the later stage of this war, this is a pretty smooth amphibious operation in terms of overcoming the resistance.
Yep.
Problem is, of course, all of these other kind of formative issues that we're up against, and so Patton is really kind of dealing with all that and orchestrating it really pretty well, I think.
Yeah. Um, I've actually walked that beach, and it's sort of a crescent beach, and it's on the ends that it's very rocky and things like that. There's a big light tower closer to Casablanca, but anybody landing towards that center, it's a pretty smooth landing. If it's just on the edges of that beach, that it gets rough. Um, what was I going to say about old George? Well, he wants to go ashore with the troops early, but they actually swing his landing craft out there for him to get into, and suddenly the French Navy shows up. And now, just as they were right before they swung it out, he realizes he's not wearing his favorite ivory-handled pistols. So he asked his aide, George Meeks, the African American sergeant who's with him, to go retrieve those pistols. And George does. And as soon as he brings them to Patton, the USS Augusta, which Patton is on, opens fire on the French fleet, and the backblast bends Patton's landing craft in half, and they have to drop it off the side of the ship. And so some historians have talked about that. That's Patton's psychic ability. That I just think it's luck of the draw. But
Probably.
he's got the 357 revolver, and then the 45 Colt Peacemaker, and they've got his initials, and he carved an eagle into one of them, and he's got two notches from two of the Mexican banditos that he killed in Mexico. So these are very personal, weapons to him, very important. He had the Colt 45, and when he got into a shootout in Mexico, realized he had to stop and reload while they were firing, and he said adobe dust was falling on him, and he swore that he'd never get caught with one pistol again. And so that's why he goes ashore wearing those two pistols on his hips. Um, and so there is a sea battle, and he gets drenched in yellow water because the French drop a dye marker to target the USS Augusta, and the eruption of water, the geyser soaks him, and that tells me two things possibly. One, he's standing really close to the action. He's not up in the captain's cabin, and he may have been leaning over getting sick. Because it's like, what are you doing over by the rail on a on a big ship like this? So, anyways, the French fleet retreats. They bring out a new landing craft for him. He gets on board with his staff, and as he heads out to battle, he takes his helmet off to the sailors on board the Augusta, and they just cheer madly. I wish I was there for that moment. It's about a half hour to shore. When he gets there, he sees a landing craft stuck on a sandbar, and guys are carrying ammo in. And he's like, you, get over here, push that thing back into the water. And what he realizes is they have to push it when a wave comes so that it has that
Yep.
momentum. And while these guys are pushing, they turn to their left and right, and there's Patton, a two-star general, pushing with them. This is not, they call him a prima donna, but when he's needed, he's there. You know,
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
let me just jump in for 1 second.
A voice from
So
above.
the voice from above, behind the
Yep.
curtain. You
Spectral.
said, Kevin, that they all cheered, right, when
Yes.
Patton got out. At this point, early in his career, how well known is Patton to kind of the American public and the army? I mean, he's probably not the big celebrity he became, right? So who is he in Morocco?
He actually is a bit of a celebrity for a lower ranking officer because when the Americans go into Mexico to pursue Pancho Villa, he goes after one of Pancho Villa's generals or captains, a guy named Cardenas, and he basically conducts a pincer movement, and it's the first use of a motorized vehicle in American history in combat, where they take two, basically Model Ts, Ford Model Ts, and one goes to the front of the ranch house and one goes to the back, and they flush out the Mexicans, and there's a gunfight, and they kill these guys and strap them to the hoods of the cars and drive them back to headquarters. And that makes big headlines. And then something that Americans loved in that time period, and John, do you agree or disagree? He's related to people that fought in the Civil War. And so it's got that heritage and fought for the Confederate side. But so it's like he must have it in his DNA, fighting and all this stuff. He's bred to be a warrior. John,
I
we
mean,
see that
it's
every
easy.
time you read about somebody in World War II or World War One. If he had a relative in the Civil War, you're going to read about it.
Yeah, most definitely. And they were conscious of that. He was very conscious of that, as you know.
Oh yeah.
Uh, of course, then you have people like Simon Bolivar Buckner Jr., who is the son of a Civil War general on the Confederate side. I mean, absolutely, that's front and center. The other thing that struck me too, is you were talking about his encounter with Pershing, his personal link, because Pershing in those days was courting Patton's sister,
Oh
right?
yeah. That
Yeah,
during the Mexican
Nita.
campaign, they were dating.
Hmm.
And afterwards, in fact, she is on the dock with Patton's wife, waving by to Pershing and George. This is going to be terrible. So they get over to Europe, and she's writing him letters and saying, "I want to come join you. I'm going to become a nurse. I'll do these things." And
In World War
Pershing,
One.
World
Yeah.
War One, yeah. And Pershing's like, "No, that's not right. The other guys are here without their wives." And George is actually writing her letters saying, "Yeah, he's so busy. You shouldn't come, sis." Pershing had three girlfriends in France during this period.
Including one very serious one. Yeah.
Yes, that he still has a torch that he's bearing for her when he gets back and wants her to move from France. And Patton's sister had no idea, and she was hoping when he came back they would rekindle, but his heart was somewhere else. But at least he didn't turn on George. At
It's
least
an
he
odd
had that
dynamic.
loyal aide.
Isn't it an odd dynamic? Yeah, exactly. I mean, Patton's a junior officer to this guy. Pershing becomes really one of the most prominent generals in American history,
Yep.
one of the most powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And he's, trying to hook up with Patton's sister. It could have put Patton in a really tough spot.
Yeah.
And I think Patton handled that reasonably well, it seems to me.
Yeah, like telling his sister, "Don't come here." He showed
Yeah.
his loyalty, but and then the tank battles he's in, Battle of Saint Mihiel in World War One, makes a lot of headlines too because he's leading tanks. It's offensive warfare in a time of trench warfare. So, Mark, actually, he is relatively well known of any general in World War II, besides probably MacArthur. I mean, Eisenhower and Bradley are such unknowns that Patton did have a little bit of notoriety.
He did, and it's all, he kind of established the armor branch by that
Hmm.
point too. So he's heavily associated with that. He had led the Second Armored Division. He was a colorful officer, so anybody who served under him tended to remember him.
Yeah,
And so I think already we see in that task force that hits Morocco that this isn't just like the ordinary commander. Many of them are conscious of the fact that Patton is command. Now he's not what he's going to be, and certainly not what he will be after the 1970 movie for the rest of
right.
us. But so within its limits, yes, I think that he's fairly well known to those going ashore.
I've actually listened to radio broadcasts from the Louisiana maneuvers of 1940 when we were moving entire armies trying to figure out how to fight, where he would be interviewed by the press. And he took Second Armored at one point during their training for a march basically across Georgia. And people would come out and cheer the tanks as they rolled by. They'd never seen anything like that before. So yeah, he going into Morocco, he's got a name. As big a
And
name as you're going to be able to have that early in the war, you
and of
know?
course consummates a successful campaign, about a week-long campaign, roughly.
Yep.
Deals with the administrative and political situation, and yeah, very, very interesting. So, I mean, this is a really good start for Patton, then, isn't it?
It really is. And so, here he is walking up on the shore, and the first person that greets him um, is a British officer. He's a liaison officer named Robert Enriquez. And you know what he's holding? He's holding the lava statue that Patton had thrown in the pond in the backyard months before. And Patton barely notices him. And he says, "Your wife wanted you to have this for good luck in combat." And Patton says, "Well, I guess she did." And that's the first thing he experiences stepping ashore. And he looks around, and not to badmouth the guys from the 7th Infantry, John, but nothing's really going on. The battle has moved inland. There's guys that are digging foxholes and sitting them in the sand. There's debris all over the place. And he looks around, he goes, "God, I wish I was a corporal." Because the responsibilities of a corporal to a general, so different. And he's looking around the beach, and he sees a local Moroccan walking along the shoreline with a donkey, and he's picking up American equipment and throwing it onto the saddlebags, onto the back. And that, no big deal. It's display, thrown away jacket here, canteen there. Suddenly the guy picks up an M1 Garand rifle, and Patton's like, "I cannot allow this." So he pulls out the 357 Magnum pearl handled pistol, takes aim and fires, and the bullet goes right by the guy's ear. He drops the rifle and runs off with it with the donkey. And that to me is Patton announcing his presence on day one in the first hour of World War II for him. And even though he missed, he accomplished the mission.
It's good that he missed.
Yes.
That was not a capital offense, and that could have caused some issues. So yeah, this has been a great start. Interesting stuff with Patton in Morocco. So I think we have some Stump the Chump questions, Kevin. I mean, that's we love that, don't we? We love looking as dumb as we possibly can. I'm incredibly good at that, as you know.
Well,
Um,
just to set the scene, John, when you and I first met in 2004, we were tour guides together for the 60th anniversary, and we spent 3 or 4 days in Normandy on our own buses, going like doing circles, going to the same locations. I had Omaha Beach and Pointe du Hoc. What did you have?
I had, at least for part of that, I had Utah Beach and the airborne landing areas, that side of the house, the
Right.
Seventh Corps.
And then when that ended, we lined up in like a line of 7 or 8 buses and went across Europe to different battlefields. And that's when you and I were on the same bus, and we started playing Stump the Chump with the audience. And we had such a fun time. We said, "Hey, you know, 20, 40 years from now, we got to do this as a,
We were so
so
prophetic. I mean, it's just amazing
we
how
didn't know what a
far-sighted.
podcast was then, but we said someday there's going to be a thing called podcast and we'll take questions."
In fact, I remember you saying that. Yeah, after I told you and prompted you. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Yeah, so how do you send us questions? That's a good point, Mark. WW2live at gmail.com is the best way. WW2live at gmail.com. So that's WW numeral 2 WorldWar2LIVE@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. It's so much
Yep.
fun.
And let us
We
know where
can't
you're
claim to
from.
know. Yeah, let us know where you're from
Mhm.
and just your name, if it's just first name, whatever you're comfortable with. And just we don't claim to know everything. So we'll do the best we can, but it's
Yep.
just fun.
All right, well, here we go. We got some questions came in by email. And here's the first one, guys. The first one is from Starburst22204.
I know that guy.
I know. I'm not sure where they're from.
Good old
And
Starburst.
I
well,
met him in a
Star
candy store. Yeah.
yeah. Starburst asks, what was the worst thing each major power did during World War II? Wow.
So why don't we call we got to figure out, so we'll say Germany, Italy, the Soviet Union, England, France, Japan,
Japan, United
Canada,
States.
Australia.
Uh, let's say USA, and not that Canada and Australia aren't great powers, but in the
Yep.
interest of limiting it somewhat, let's just and
All right, so
and
let's start with USA. What was the worst thing the USA did in
well,
World War II? I have already have an idea, but John, I'm going to let you shoot first.
well, I mean, we can cover both of it. I mean, of course, I think that the knee-jerk reaction is the incarceration of Japanese Americans, but
Yep,
I'm going
that's
to dissent
exactly what I
from.
was going to say. Yep.
But you know what? I'm going to dissent from it a little bit because I think that the worst thing that goes on in World War II is something that had already been going on before World War II, which was basically a racial caste system in this country, of apartheid in some parts of the country. Honestly, with Jim Crow, there's still lynchings that go on the cusp of the war and during the war. There's race riots happening during the war. There's
Yep.
incredible injustice for African Americans. And the war, by the way, isn't won without African Americans, serving in uniform and also the war effort. So it's one of the reasons why we see change, fortunately. But I think in a general umbrella sense, that's the worst thing the USA does. What do you think?
I completely agree. And now, when you say race riots, that is not limited to the United States. We have a lot in the
Right.
United States because a lot of the training facilities are in the South because that's cheaper for the Army. You have to heat them in the winter. But their white Southerners do not want black soldiers, blacks with money and authority, and self-respect and all that. They don't want them down there, and there are bloody fights. And then there's the same thing happens overseas. There's a famous one in England. It's just everywhere.
Yeah, in
And
Australia.
the army is segregated. To Patton's credit, when he was low on troops in November of 44, he starts taking staff guys and training them to be infantry because it was, these infantry divisions are working at 50% troops. Why are our staffs not doing that? Like, if they can still function at 50%, and they
Mhm.
were taking black service guys, were supply and logistics guys, and training them as infantrymen and putting them in the front lines. Eisenhower is going to repeat that during the Battle of the Bulge when there's such a loss of manpower. Unfortunately, if you were a black soldier and you were a master sergeant and you wanted to be in a rifle unit, you'd have to be degraded to private. And a lot of them did that. That's how much they
Yep,
love this country.
absolutely.
Um, and so it is shameful. It's a stain. But what a way to honor African American soldiers, knowing that with all of that against them, they still served, they still
Yep,
volunteered, they took demotions in rank in order to fight for their country.
yep.
So,
Sounds like
And
we should do a whole episode on that
oh,
sometime in the
easily,
future.
easily.
All
many
right, let's go
episodes. Yes.
Germany. Germany.
Oh, Germany's obvious, isn't it? I mean, the
Holocaust.
Holocaust,
Yeah,
10
okay.
million people.
Yeah.
To me, that's obvious. And of course, the medical experiments within that.
Hmm.
And of course, Japan, kind of same thing.
Yep.
There's a Holocaust that Japan basically perpetrates that isn't, quite as systematic, but is quite deadly, especially in China. Unit 731, human medical experiments, and chemical warfare, all of this kind of stuff.
And then you've got
Unfortunately,
in the Pacific and those islands and everything, when it's Asia for the Asiatics, this whole campaign of we don't want Americans and Westerners here. We're all Asiatics together. And they get in and oppress those islanders and people of the Philippines just as brutally as anybody else.
yeah,
Yeah.
they really do, and especially in the Philippines, and of course that's why one of the reasons why the population tended to be so pro-American. But really, the worst atrocities happen in China, which is why we didn't really hear about them for a long time,
Yep.
during the Cold War. But, what's of most intriguing, I think, is the Soviet Union. because
Hmm.
it also brings into light the kind of Faustian bargain we had to make to have an alliance with what had been, by any measure, one of the most murderous countries in the history of the planet before the war.
Yep.
With the purges and the gulags. I mean, this was a country that was enslaving hundreds of thousands of its citizens and foreign nationals, including Americans, to work in labor camps in Siberia in gold mining because the regime needed gold reserves. And so all that had already led to the deaths of who knows how many people, and then it continues during the war.
Yep.
Much less, of course, the Soviet atrocities they perpetrate once they go into Germany and whatever else. And of course, the Germans earned that on some level, but it doesn't necessarily make it right.
Yep. I think about the Red Purges to the Red Army, and they're basically torturing Soviet generals, accusing them of disloyalty, and they're pulling their teeth out with pliers, and then coming to them and going, "Hey, we got attacked. We need you to lead these armies." You know, it's like, oh my
Yes,
God.
yes,
And then I guess, I wouldn't know which is worse. I guess the atrocities against Poland, I would probably say are the worst,
yeah,
Yeah.
followed by Finland. So I think you know what, those are the big ones. Well, let's why don't we leave it at that?
Well, wait, before we go though, I have to ask,
Yeah.
with a name like Festoso, what about Italy? We don't hear much
yeah.
about them because they
Okay.
drop out early. What's their biggest deal?
Yes. So it's twofold in my opinion. It's the invasion of Ethiopia in the mid 30s,
Ooh,
which is
good one.
really, kind of a
Mhm.
base point for World War II.
Yep.
And that is an appalling thing. The Italians just are basically almost executing a genocide on some level, in Ethiopia. And this was quite a cause célèbre, I think, around the world. It got Italy thrown out of the League of Nations, and so there's that. And then, of course, really quite tragically during the war, they cave in to their German allies and turn over many of their Italian Jewish population,
Yep.
which of course leads to the deaths of now of several thousand people, unfortunately. So as I see it, that's the
That's
worst. What do you
awesome.
think?
And then I would add, I wouldn't put this ahead of them. I would put this as a distant third. Is their invasion of France. Basically, as the Battle of France is wrapping up and Germany has done all the fighting, everything, they sweep into a small section along the border and it's used greatly as propaganda against the Italians, a stab in the back to France that was unnecessary, and it was just an act of aggression for aggression's sake.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Great
Again,
question.
I'm taking notes here. I think doing an episode just on Ethiopia would be really cool. Kind of a not well studied event. Okay, next question from Elise. Which battles in World War II are overcredited in their significance, and which battles are undercredited and actually more important than the widely understood? Wow.
Well, I'll start with the latter. Um,
Start climbing that ladder,
I'll,
John.
I'll let Kevin take the former. I'll start with the latter, with two T's, latter. Um, Buna, the Battle of Buna in 1942. So this is a battle that goes on in like November to like like to the very beginning of January 1943. So it is happening and coinciding with Operation Torch in North Africa, of course, but with Guadalcanal. And it's really, to a great extent, Guadalcanal and Buna are two battles of the same campaign,
And Boone
especially from
is
a
in New
Japanese
Guinea, right,
perspective.
John?
This is in New Guinea. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's on
yeah.
the north. It's like the southeastern extreme of New Guinea, but on the northern coast, Papua New Guinea. And this is the first American ground victory in World War II, and yet you hardly ever hear about it. It is absolutely a complete turning point battle that allows MacArthur to have some level of momentum across New Guinea and eventually is going to lead us back to the Philippines. So it's really quite consequential, but unfortunately not all that well known. The commander who was responsible for it, Robert Eichelberger, and we should have a
Oh,
multiple
yeah.
shows on
He's the
him.
man.
He was actually a classmate of Patton's and good friend. He's the guy who really masterminds that victory.
And do you think
So
like not to like stick my neck out here, John, but
neck
is it
away.
do you think it's a little less well known because the Marines were involved?
I think that certainly is a factor, and that they were involved over on Guadalcanal, although of course the
Right.
army was there with them on Guadalcanal too. But I think that's a factor. I think the mundanity of the place and the anonymity of such a place, but also that it's happening under MacArthur. And when it comes to MacArthur's theater, he sucks all the oxygen out of the room that doesn't feed MacArthur. And he actually even, he this is so MacArthur. he authorized Eichelberger to speak to the press in the aftermath of his victory, and Eichelberger was very glib and friendly and very good with the press. And then when MacArthur saw how much the correspondents liked Eichelberger and were going to write about him, then he threatened with sending Eichelberger home,
And
as if it
John,
was
didn't
someone's fault.
didn't MacArthur, like when Americans would win a victory in the Pacific, it would be in the newspaper, Americans win, and if the Australians did something well, it was the Allies have done something well under MacArthur. Like he wouldn't even give the other troops the credit that they were due.
It's, I mean, it's true, but it was really more like commander's intent kind of thing. It was more of people in his PR section
Ah, okay,
anticipating this is what the general wanted, like Larry Larabos and folks like that. So I don't know that there was any specific instance where he said, okay, change that. There could have been. I don't know.
right.
But it wouldn't surprise me. And that's exactly the way he wanted it, unfortunately.
So the whole time you've been talking, John, I'm sitting there going, okay, which battle was overrated? And so this is what
Tough.
I'm going to go with on the other side of the globe. I think it was Montgomery's crossing of the Rhine River. This has been given almost every piece of equipment needed for the crossing, including airborne troops. This is being played up as, we're going to do this crossing in the north, and it's going to be the big war winner. It's going to change the game. And lo and behold, troops of the Ninth Armored Division capture the Remagen Bridge, the only remaining bridge across the Rhine River, and just change the face of how they're going to close out the war. Here we were planning this big offensive in the north, and suddenly right in the center, we got a lane going right into Germany. And then the day before Montgomery crosses, Patton's Third Army, the Fifth Infantry Division, is going to cross. And so this big thing that is played up as this big battle that's going to be such a game changer is thwarted by the Americans and their ingenuity and their basically driving force. We got it. It's the ingenuity of, like, we see a bridge, even though it just got blown up and landed right back where it started. Let's get across that quickly. And then Patton saying, we're going to do this on the run. We're going to get to that river. We're going to cross it. Whereas Montgomery kind of reached it and was building up for almost a month, for this big grand gesture. And so I'm going to say Montgomery crossing the Rhine. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean that's a good one, Remagen happens over 2 weeks before Operation Varsity.
Yeah.
Montgomery crossing the Rhine. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Mark, did we win?
Don't hate on us, UK viewers. That's all I'm going to say there.
We love our
You
UK.
win. You
Oh,
win.
we
Yes.
we
All
love
right,
Monty.
I can't help myself. I just want to throw out, I think actually one of the most overrated battles that people think about is actually Kursk. Because there's this big talk, there's 500 tigers were killed and all this. Really, it was just the Russians just waited. The Germans hurled themselves on it, got ground up, and then it was over, right? But
Yep.
people study about it, and there's books and everything, and I don't really think it was all that much. But anyways, that's just my sideline view
Quite
there.
anticlimactic, yeah.
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
there's so much armor involved, probably.
Right.
I was actually also thinking about El Guitar, because really it's just the Germans attack, they don't take the hill, they move backwards. That to them that was just another day in the life. But to
Yeah.
the Americans, it's a huge defensive victory, because we can show that we can fight on a battlefield. But John, I think we're 3 for 3. I think we won that one.
All right,
Yeah, I
that's a
think we
good
won
one.
big.
All
Yeah.
right, one last one. Oh, by the way, El Guitar
Oh.
we're going to do an episode on that because that's like Rommel. I read your book, right?
That's
Awesome.
Yes,
that's the fighting.
that's a movie.
that's
That's a
okay.
movie that didn't happen.
I know. I'm sorry. I read his
Of
book
course it
too,
did.
but that's besides the point.
Everything's
We got
accurate
another-
in movies, Kevin. What are you talking about?
We got another question, so we're
Yeah,
not out of the woods yet,
Now,
John.
one
No,
last
we're not.
question.
Yeah.
And, I like to think that here in World War II Live, one thing we're also doing is just reflecting on World War II today in 2025. And this is a great question for that from Paul. He says, what 2 or 3 aspects of World War II are gradually fading from the narrative of the war over time? And I mentioned we were talking earlier, and I was saying that June 6th today in 2025 is kind of America's day of memorializing World War II.
Right.
And I think in like the 60s, it was actually December 7th, right? We used to like think about it, and now that's changed. So I think that's what he's getting at. Like, what did we used to think about World War II in like the 50s and 60s that we now think differently?
Well,
That's
I
like an
guess,
SAT question. Holy
yeah.
cow.
So regarding Pearl
Tough
Harbor,
one.
Yeah.
so when I first went to work at World War II magazine before it became based, well,
Yeah.
WWII history, and we would put the cover of the magazine up on the wall with what the sales were. And when I first came on board, we were working on a Pearl Harbor cover with some Pearl Harbor stories. And I was very excited. This was my first magazine to work on and everything. And when it went up on the wall, the rating was so low. And I was shocked. And they said, hey, for better for worse, we put Germans on the cover. It sells well. The only thing that sells well for the Pacific War is Okinawa and Iwo Jima. And people don't want to read about Pearl Harbor. They want to read about Okinawa and Iwo Jima. They want to read about D-Day. They want to read about the Bulge. They want to read about the Soviet front. Or they want to read about Rommel. They want to read about Patton. And it shocked me that a Pearl Harbor issue did not have that same, momentum that all those other topics did. So yeah, that's Pearl Harbor is definitely a fade because I think, we like that when we think of World War II, we think of America at its height when the tanks are coming off the production line, the B-29s are coming off the production lines. We've got this professional Army and Marine Corps and Navy and Army Air Forces, the fleets of planes over Europe, the multiple carriers launching aircraft. We like to think of that American strength being projected in a war, not, boy, do we get caught off guard on day one.
Yeah, I mean, along those lines, I think maybe the first Philippines campaign, it's just really not very well known, and yet it is so incredibly important. And it was the front and center story in
Mhm.
1942, believe you me, especially because MacArthur was there for a while and whatever else. But I think by now that has kind of faded from our memory, in addition to the kind of military organization we had, which was a British model colonial army that
Mhm.
is mostly Filipino and partially American. And there's really no, precedent for that ever since, or really even before.
Yep. And I'm going to add this too. I think, and I've talked about this numerous times, that whenever a war ends, not World War II, any war, the first histories written are by the generals writing their memoirs, defending what they did. And then it's not until a lot later that third party objective historians get in there and things are becoming declassified and a closer look is given. Um, I think that, that's how we would look at the wars through the generals and those high ranking officers and their decisions. And now we like to think about that private in the platoon, and his experiences. And that's what a lot of veterans have written as they've gotten older because they're bringing up they're bringing up these things that they can deal with now, that a lot of these memories that they suppressed. And technology plays a big factor in that. John, you and I have read those Forrest Pogue interviews with troops from D-Day, and I was so excited when I found these records in the archives. I'm like, oh my God, he interviewed these soldiers. And then you read it, he goes, I spoke to 7 soldiers and they all agreed that the fighting was tough. It's not what we imagine when we think of interviewing a veteran because he's using a dictaphone and taking notes. He didn't have a recorder in his hand that he could press a button that we have. I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of veterans who were privates in World War II. And then you look at something like Band of Brothers. We're watching a platoon, over multiple episodes. Now, they did have a show called Combat in the 60s, but that was more fictitious. Whereas with Band of Brothers, they really try. I mean, every character in Band of Brothers was a real person. So I think that that's the other thing. The element of the change of technology has allowed us to tell that real ground pounder in the weeds, guy in the mud story. And
Yeah,
John,
because I
that's your bread and butter in a lot of ways.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and so that, Pogue did the best he could because it was just all in the moment, whatever
Mhm.
he could do in the moment. And so Dr. Ambrose, I think, kind of hits the sweet spot because he's dealing with these veterans about 40 years after the war. So they're of retirement age, but they're still fairly young and vigorous and good memories and
Yeah.
and active and traveling and wanting to tell their story by then because they're not heavily involved in establishing their careers, raising their families and all that. All that has happened by then in many cases. And so I think he hit that sweet spot in terms of interviewing veterans and getting that personal story. The sad thing is, of course, by now there's no way to do that
Yeah.
anymore because
I've landed a few, but they're few and far
but
between.
I mean, if you really wanted to cover a unit, and you wanted to interview 100 guys from a company or something, I mean, that's just not happening.
Yep.
So And that is the only way to really get the personal story,
So,
at that level.
so Mark, did we get them all? Did we get them all right?
That's
Maybe
a
if he gets
great.
off mute, he can tell us.
Oh, I'll give you. I'm sorry, I was on mute. Oh my God. I'll give you that last one. I'll give you an A minus. All
All
right.
right.
I'm a
You can
hard
get an A
grader.
I'm
minus.
the A,
All right.
John's the
Hey, let me
minus.
just one last thing, right? So,
Absolutely.
we're hoping to have some like docs on our channel, right? Where I've interviewed sons of band of brothers. And what I think is really interesting about that is just what you said, John. All of the veterans are kind of gone.
Mhm.
And now the sons and daughters are starting to go as well.
Yep.
And so that's why I'm getting their story. It's like that next level. And in another 10 years, they'll all be gone. It'll only be the
Yeah,
grandkids. So
I
it's
know.
we're at a kind of
Uh,
this crossroad time when it comes to this war and
we
memory.
are.
Interesting.
Yep.
Yep. Because most of the children are baby boomers,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Yeah.
baby boomers aren't young
They got
anymore.
gray
So,
hair.
I mean, I
yeah.
interviewed Henry Sledge, and I was thinking the whole time, wow, he's so young. He was born in the 60s. So he
Mhm.
was kind of a late baby for Eugene Sledge. So
He was.
yeah.
Yeah. Right.
All right, that was awesome, guys. John, you want to wrap us up here? Put a bow on this thing?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, if you're enjoying our podcast and our channel, please subscribe, leave us comments, share questions with us. We'd love to get your questions, obviously. Our email address is ww2live@gmail.com. That's ww2live@gmail.com, and that's with a Roman numeral. So the last thing we cover, of course, very, very quickly is what you. So, Kevin, what you reading?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I'm up to. Yesterday, I went up to Capitol Hill and got a front row seat at the Congressional Gold Medal Award for the 6888 Central Postal Directory Battalion. This was the only all black, all female WAC unit, Women Army Corps unit, to go overseas in World War II. I wrote several articles about them. One of them was an interview with a woman named Lena Derricott King, and that was made into the movie that Tyler Perry put out, 6888, honoring the women and what they did. So, because of that, I was very fortunate to be invited to the ceremony. And so, yes, I'd love to tell you I read a little something or did a little research, but that was my history contribution for the week was attending that event, and I'm very proud of that. What about you, John? What you been up to?
I can't top that. I mean, it's just the wonderful glamour of teaching. Last night taught about Okinawa, about Iwo Jima, but most significantly about Luzon, 1945, which is also overlooked, and we will cover that. But doing that and catching up on a ton of reading too. So uh, pretty mundane stuff compared to the gold medal
The
ceremony
Hollywood
for this.
He-Mel. Yeah.
It's an incredible unit, and I highly recommend the movie to everybody, the 6888. It's on Netflix.
Yep.
And even in spite of the fact that Kevin was the historical consultant, it's really, really good. So shows how good Tyler Perry is.
Yeah, no one ever compliments the military history advisor. They go, "Here's what you got wrong."
They really should. We're such unsung heroes, aren't we?
Yes.
I mean, we are.
We
I
don't like the
thought,
word, we don't like to throw the word hero around a lot, but in this case,
We
yes, we
don't.
are definitely heroes.
But
uh,
if it
Yeah,
fits, yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
I thought Dale Dye was the only historical consultant on every movie ever,
Oh,
right?
I got special permission from him to do this. So
Okay,
You're
good,
right.
good, good. All right,
Yeah,
excellent.
you've got to sign permission slips.
yeah.
So.
I forgot to wear my World War II uniform during filming, but he'll forgive me for that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. It's been a lot of fun.
Yep.
Absolutely. And again, if you'd enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel, to our podcast, leave us comments, send us emails, send us questions, ww2live@gmail.com. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Roger out. Take care.